Heidegger says, okay, so the work of art, its origin is the artist, and the artist's origin is the work of art. And then he becomes very angry in his text, and he says, jedermann sieht, dass wir uns im Kreise bewegen. Everybody sees that we're moving just in circles. This is nonsense. And he all of a sudden abandons this path of looking into the relationship of the artist and the artwork, and he starts something else. He says, now, okay, let's forget about the artist for a second. Let's see what a work of art is. And he says, and this is again a rhetorical maneuver, which where he kind of heavily understates. He says, everybody knows what a work of art is, because work of arts are everywhere. If you walk into public squares, public places, you see that there are monuments there and murals on the walls. If you walk into the galleries of museums, then you see that their artworks are set up on the walls, in German, an den Wänden aufgehängt und auf den Podesten aufgestellt. And this is important for his later argument. He thinks that artworks are set up, and a setup of worlds, as I will explain in a few minutes. And he says, so even if we go into the private rooms and the collections, then we will see that there are always artworks set up there and put up. So in the end, I come to the conclusion that works of art are things, nothing more. And this is the starting point for him. He has this difference in between thing and tool, in German das Ding und das Zeug. Das Zeug is characterized, or the tool is characterized through its Dienlichkeit. I give you a little German course here as well for those who know German, which is not extremely useful when you go to the baker or to the restaurant, but at least it's a few German words that you might remember. So this thing is, in Heidegger's opinion, something that doesn't serve, but it contains something else. And to me, he describes it very well when he says, das Bild hängt an der Wand wie ein Jagdgewehr oder ein Hut. The work of art hangs on the wall like a cap or a rifle. And he starts making more fun of it. He says, Hölderlin's poems have been put into the soldiers' rucksacks, as has the shoeshine set, and Beethoven's quartets are stored in the publisher's archives like potatoes in the cellar. That is what art is about. And if you look at computer games, you might very well try to find a similar access to that and say, well, why don't we for a moment assume that a computer game is a thing? Because we find it stored in the shops, we find it in the bedrooms of our kids, and we find these computer games as worlds that have been set up everywhere. Heidegger calls the work of art a thing, like a stone, a dog, or as he says, even God himself. These are all things. The work of art, and this is where it differs from other things like stones or gods, is that the work of art is ein angefertigtes Ding, a man-made artifact. And this probably as well applies for computer games. And he says, das Werk macht mit etwas anderem öffentlich bekannt. Es offenbart anderes. It reveals something else. The work of art, maybe also a computer game, makes public something other than itself. And I think we were slipping into a discussion that we had a few days about simulation and games, but we can pick that up later on. It manifests something other is brought together with the thing that is made. Work being means setting up a world. And this does not mean just placing it, but erecting it or building it up somewhere. Werk sein heißt eine Welt aufstellen. And in German, this setting up is related to erstellen or errichten. Putting itself to work means putting the particular truth of a historical period into the oeuvre or into the work. So you pick a particular time and place and try to encapsulate that within a work of art. And isn't that also the case with some computer games, that you look at a certain historical period or a moment in time, like 1789 and Paris, and you try to freeze this moment and encapsulate it in this thing called the computer game. Or in this case, this is Call of Duty Modern Warfare #4 that was published in 2007, a moment in history of the year 1986, I think it was, when next to Chernobyl, nuclear disaster happened, and where in the city of Pripyat, the people had to be evacuated, and there was a urban ruin created there where no one stayed. So the attempt of this game is, like with a work of art in Heidegger's sense, to set up a world. I could set up this computer game on my desk and refer to a certain moment in time in history and a certain place. But what happens now? The world that the computer game talks about, or the work of art talks about, has been withdrawn from the works. And that is the central notion in the origin of the work of art, the withdrawal of worlds. The work of art somehow cannot keep the world worlding, as Heidegger would call it. It cannot guarantee that this Pripyat and this Chernobyl keep producing earth or producing physis any longer, but the world has withdrawn from it, it has gone away, and now there is this representation in the work of art or in the computer game that is not the world any longer. So if you look at a photograph that a photographer called Igor Kozlov took in 2011, this is again the same hotel that I showed you on the picture before that. Where is it? But now it is 4 years later, and the world has taken another path, another development, and another production of Earth, Erstellung von Erde, as the computer game has. The computer game could not follow with berg trees growing up in the ruins, of little insects creeping into these nuclear ruins. So it has lost its contact to the world, and that is Heidegger's point. The computer suggests that the simulated world would be worlding, but this is an illusion, also an illusion in the very literal sense of illusio, a game trick, so to speak. And if you look at, if you again look back at this, oops, sorry, wrong direction, this Ubisoft game, when this game, it seems to me, I don't know whether you agree, tries very strongly to suggest that the world that we would see here is worlding, that there are people moving around, and it was this interesting sequence that we saw yesterday where there were the character pushed away other people, so one had the feeling there was a living organism and a living ecosystem, but it is not. It is completely withdrawn from the world, and the world is withdrawn from it. The game is characterized by what Heidegger calls its Gewesensein, the having been, and not by the being now. And he says that Weltentzug und Weltzerfall nie mehr rückgängig zu machen sind. You cannot come back, you cannot reintroduce the worlding into these worlds that are sterile and dead. And we had a discussion at the coffee table at one moment where you had some creative ideas of couldn't there be computer games where the world is re-infused by some mechanisms of saying robots taking new textures and importing them into the game so that the game keeps something like closely connected to the world? And that's actually a good question. We could come across that later. I don't think that it is possible, by the way, but I think it's interesting. I think in the process of being put up, the works lose what Heidegger calls their springing power, or Sprungkraft. And Sprungkraft is a very strange notion in Heidegger's thinking. It is something where an object would be able to do unpredicted things on its own, almost like an autopoietic act. And again, Feng, we could discuss this if you wanted to in regard to Guattari's notion of autopoiesis and the Foucauldian that you presented. Heidegger doesn't call it autopoiesis, he calls it springing power or Sprungkraft. And you can see the Sprungkraft of the real world here. The nuclear disaster happened, but there are trees growing and insects inhabiting this environment. It was not possible to demolish it completely, and by the Sprungkraft, this object or this system develops completely new dynamics of creating something out of its own that was not planned and was not intended. Different from an inherently consistent development, the springing power, now this is this autopoiesis-like force or potential of objects and of systems, would enable complex processes to create unpredictable outcomes. And Heidegger mentions that not in this text origin of the artwork, but in a text on Hölderlin's Holy Wildness, where he says that poetry often has this thing of coming up with something completely unpredicted. And he calls it also creating unpredictable outcomes, and in German he says schaffen or schöpfen, which is close to creating such things. Now, with the computer game, we are in a desperate situation, because the computer game, if we believe Heidegger, or my adaptation of Heidegger towards computer games, it has lost the Sprungkraft. It cannot create something unpredictable, because everything is in code and it is withdrawn from the world, so it has no contact to rebind with the world again. Games present decayed worlds and are setting forth Earth as the self-secluding. Earth is the constituent in games which complements the presentational achievement of the world by avoiding that the presented things become customary. And how could that be? How could there be something in games that creates new and unpredicted material? I think if we look at the game alone as aufgestellte Welt, as a set-up world, we would not find this Sprungkraft. But where we could possibly find it is when we look at how players work with these computer worlds. And they seem to all of a sudden reintroduce Earth, that is this closely to physics connected power, to create connotations and to create new objects and to create new environments which have a life of their own that has not been planned and designed and programmed in advance. So you see that one of these boys, he put on a Russian fur cap because he likes it when he plays this game about Pripyat, that he looks like a Russian soldier. And he's called Maxim. Or they put this little Kremlin paper 3D puzzle next to the computer because they think that complements nicely with the Chernobyl disaster. And with all of these things like Coca-Cola bottles, pizza boxes, finger thumbs on the screen, there's something introduced that actually has the quality of what Heidegger would have called Earth in the context of a Greek temple or a painting that is still in a lively environment where it can produce something and not only represent something. Well, I've gotten a sign that I have to close soon, so I'd rather close now and ask you to maybe debate a little bit of whether you think these ideas of a computer game being a thing in the Heideggerian sense, having lost its Sprungkraft, and whether this introduction of the difference between world and earth, or Welt und Erde, could make any sense in game studies or for the philosophical reflections on games. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, we have fairly good time for comments and questions.
First of all, thank you for your talk. I was thinking about games that are algorithm-based, like Minecraft or something like that, that they reproduce themselves while you're playing it, while you're walking through the world, and they're based on this algorithms. They create new worlds and stuff like this. Wouldn't that be kind of a setting or a Sprungkraft, as Heidegger calls it, that they are kind of new worlds that create, that are kind of based in the code, but that are not pre-coded, kind of. Could you comment on that, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm wondering myself whether that would be possible to have games that really keep worlding. And one possibility would be that you have algorithms that take information from the outside world and import that into games. And I've seen that to some degree in games where textures were updated according to the real-world textures, in simulations also. But I think where you end up with this problem is that you come to this Borges dilemma. If you want to create a map of the world that is getting closer and closer and closer to the world, then in the end the world disappears. So if you would try to import textures into the game that reflect to some lively process, you would also have to import smells. You would also have to import day and night time. You would have to import radioactivity levels in the material and so forth. So the closer you come to making it worlding, in the full sense of the word, the more you make it almost a copy or a better copy of the world. And that is the problem that I see with that.
Hi, Mathias, and thank you very much for your work. Rather than a question, I wanted to thank you because it was very in-depth and very easy to follow. And I wanted to give a bit of solidarity in your direction, since the last work on Heidegger that I also did, recognizing the interactivity of this world, so the possibility to manipulate this world, the very possibility for them to be worlds, and as such to change us from the ontological point of view. So maybe we could also talk about this later, but to me, this makes perfect sense, and it was very clear.
Okay.
So that would also be, I think it would be something that could be applied to many sectors. For example, to these health simulations. Well, are they still worlding in a way that they update to changes that happen in the health environment that is monitored? Or are they just a point of a particular historic truth that is remodeled or simulated, and then the world goes in another direction? So maybe you have a model of, or a game about Ebola, and all of the scientists think, well, it will go in this direction, and the game would also reproduce this, but in the real world, it takes another turn. And isn't that a little bit what we experience all the time, that things turn out other than what the simulations suggest, even the weather forecast for tomorrow?
I would like to, thanks Mathias, really fascinating presentation. I would like to pick up on the word work of art, and where work of art as a man-made thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, after as we talked, after my recent reading of the other Kaiwa for Paolo Rufino, I stumbled upon a really interesting comment of his on, can nature produce works of art? And then he comes to the conclusion, or he comes up with work of aesthetics as this which is produced by nature, and work of art as this which is produced by man. And when I listened to you and I thought about algorithms and computer games and those algorithmically generated worlds, I thought, if a machine could, out of its own, generate it, would that be work of art? Would that be work of aesthetics? These are some crazy futurologist musings, but just this very concept is interesting as a man-made product.
It's difficult
as a
for
work of
me
art.
to imagine how art could be non-man-made. And there are some sections in Heidegger also where he hints that in the end the work of art reveals something, it shows something. And isn't that something that is already embedded in nature then? Would an artwork, for example, reveal something that is an work of art in nature? And it is still the process of revealing that nature cannot do. Nature alone cannot reveal some truth or some beauty. And with machines, I really would not dare to say something about that. Yeah, or with the animal kingdom. I mean, Hannah would have to say something about that, whether art can be produced by animals. I mean, that is actually a discussion that in the art community is something that has, in an ironic or in a serious way, been tackled by many artists. Or human-artist collaborations in producing art, or human-machine collaborations then. But to erase the human completely is difficult for me to imagine. If you have an idea of how that should work, let me know.
Okay.
Maybe following this question, I was wondering, you somehow replace, so when you talked about the ruin, you're talking about how the trees are growing and the bugs are crawling in. And then when you talked about the wildness in computer games, you were talking about the pizza boxes and the Coke cans.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering whether you are replacing, like you are kind of saying that the nature and the humans are, or the humans are taking the place of nature, or what is that relationship? Does that make sense?
Can you ask the question again? That nature is...
So when you talked about wildness in Heidegger's sense, you used nature as what makes the wildness. Is that right?
Well, there's the earth on one hand, and then there is the world. The world is the thing that reveals truth, but only truth of a particular moment in history and at a certain place on the planet. And the earth is the one that hides, again, truth, but it embeds it also, and it produces it. So these are two categories that work hand in hand in Heidegger. He says one cannot be without the other. There's no earth without world, and there's no world without earth. And the way they get together is in this process that he calls bestreiten. And this is, again, a tricky German word because it means two things that might sound almost opposite to non-German speakers. Bestreiten means that you fight against each other. So this physis, this earth and wind and the smells and the liquids, they fight against these abstract representations of world. But at the same time, bestreiten in German means that you do something together. So you could say, with the help of my friend, konnte ich meinen Lebensunterhalt bestreiten. I could make a living. So it has this double meaning of fighting against each other and helping each other. And I think that is Heidegger's point, that these two categories support each other even though they are completely different and look almost like controversial or not being able to be harmonized. And if you look at this image again of the kids playing at the computer, you could say there's this abstract world inside the computer. Maybe that is what you meant with machine and nature. But then there is this physical reality that seems almost opposed to it, because this thing is not nicely modeled like in a computer game, this Kremlin crap 3D puzzle there. So it seems as if they would contradict each other, but at the same time they bestreiten, they construct a new totality of the Welt and Erde.
Okay, I think we had the round off there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.